but that also applies to those who offer themselves as black or African American leaders. They should not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their policies and what they are doing. Mm-hmm. And whether it's black, white, green, or pink, that's not what the primary issue is. The primary issue is what are your policies and what are you doing, and that should be applied particularly to those who offer themselves as leaders from the White House down to the doghouse.
Mm. Education. The root is, I believe, Latin, leading from darkness into light. It relates educo. And what is it about proper education? That's what you're talking about, as opposed to the stuff that our children are being unmotivated with in the so-called school system. What is it about the enlightenment of the mind? What is it? True enlightenment of the mind is content that makes a connection. And what would you give in terms of your understanding, your experience with the right kind of information coming into a human being's mind?
The kind of information that's going to give the human being a self-appreciation, a real knowledge of your past, where you came from, a serious knowledge of where you are at the moment, what's happening to you at the moment, and therefore what you must do in order to either improve or change what your present condition is into what you want to be and what you want the condition, the environment around you to be.
The story of the enslavement period here in America is one where reading and learning ABCs, even counting, was a intentional technique of, or part of, the enslavement process, the forbidding of reading, the forbidding of knowing how to read, how to write. What do you see in the intent of that as it relates to what is happening today under the mirage of teaching that the same thing is happening? Our children are coming out of these schools not knowing how to read and write.
Not only not how to read and write, but how to think critically and understand. And that's one of the things that we see going on. The destruction of a public school system that's supposed to educate the masses of people is now boiled down into a system of preparing people of color, particularly for the prison system, the new form of enslavement of people of color. So that, for example, this whole business of calling charter schools, which has nothing to do really with education, but to separate allegedly elite group of people as opposed to the masses of people, and to make money for those who are controlling the system. And so you don't have any serious education now. You have preparation for tests that are really ridiculous and doesn't prove anything, except it adds to the miseducation of the masses and just primarily preparing for tests. And that's one of the things that you find when our president, the president chose Arne Duncan, for example, for his Secretary of Education. It's the kind of thing that Mayor Bloomberg is doing right now in the city. That we're not really educating people; we're training people to take tests that are, when you examine these tests, there are very little value whatsoever in terms of educating people, but it keeps those who are making these tests, they're getting more and more money. The youngsters are not being trained to critically examine what they are told or anything of that sort. It's just making robots.
Brother Father Lucas is our guest online here at Harlem Community Radio. The show is Respectful Life. Once again, we're dealing with mental health, and we approach it from various angles, and we're dealing with his experience, and he's given us what I've said is the conclusion that would be in an interview. Now we go to what is it in your experience as a chaplain in the prison system that proves what you say is on point?
Well, one of the things that you notice is a large number of those who are incarcerated. First, you have to go to the reason why they're incarcerated. And a lot of this is just absolute pure nonsense. For example, this so-called stop and frisk, which Mayor Bloomberg and his deputy, the police commissioner, both of them, I think, really are suffering from the Napoleon complex. But what you find there is a large number are not able to read or write. On the other hand, you have some of the more intelligent people that I have encountered are incarcerated. And when I was there as a chaplain, and then moved up the ranks to a deputy director and acting assistant commissioner, if you look at the so-called Department of Corrections, which they're doing no correcting anything, but I call it departments of corruption, you find that in the first place, if you recall, I think former Governor Potato Head Pataki cut out most of the, particularly in the state system, most of the educational programs have been cut out. You find that what's happening, and you have some attempt of education in the city department, but they're really, as a whole, it has been, as Michelle Alexander in that fantastic book, The New Jim Crow, it's simply providing jobs for, particularly in the state system, for uneducated white folks in the upper counties, providing jobs on the basis of incarceration of people of color. I think the number now is close to 80% of those incarcerated in the upstate prisons you could find come from about 5 counties in New York City. And in the city department, it is very interesting that better than 80% of those incarcerated are blacks and Latinos, people of color, and the vast majority of the officers and the civilian staff are people of color, yet still the top positions are making the policies and setting the policies are white folks, particularly since the Mayor Bloomberg's appointee of Dora Shiro as the Commissioner of Correction, or white Jewish females. And so no matter what titles you give to the people of color, even if you make one a chief of the department, like the chief of the police department, simply carries out the policies that are set by white folks. And in a department where like in the Department of Correction, where the vast majority, as I said, of the incarcerated and of the staff are people of color, white folks are setting the policies. In the state, you find, again, the vast majority of the incarcerated are people of color, but the staffs are primarily white folks, a lot of them former farm people, farm workers, and farmers who, when this Ronald Reagan, under the guise, in this society we have fancy names for what we are doing. So you have deregulation, and what deregulation was all about was enabling putting in laws that enable the small farmers to be gobbled up by the big farm owners, and most of those folks did not have any serious education, but to provide jobs for them, they open up like what Cuomo did, and when he was, Mario Cuomo, whose claim to fame was the 23 more prisons that he created in upstate areas, where they provided then jobs for these so-called officers who some of them couldn't even spell their own name, incarcerating people of color. And that whole system, the whole so-called war on drugs, everything this country do has to be described in terms of wars, because that's all what we know. And sometimes we even call our invasion and occupation of other people's country for their resources. We call it wars. And that provided the gimmick for the incarceration of hundreds of thousands of people of color. And getting back to the city, you don't find stop and frisk in the colleges. You don't find stop and frisk in white communities where the use of drugs and the possession of drugs are if not only equal but superior to what's going on in our communities. But you don't find stop and frisk. You don't find stop and frisk on Wall Street. So it's a gimmick, and until we realize what's happening, and then forget about who Kim Kardashian is screwing, or the television, the electronic games, and so forth, and start trying to understand what's happening around us, we're being hooked.
Father Lucas, two things: the piece about Kim Kardashian and her way of life. That term we do not use here on Family Radio, and your point that you were making about the religious group that this lady at the top of the Department of Corrections is putting in is that which can be used against Harlem Community Radio to say that Brother Leroy is fostering anti-Semitism, which has been a false claim in the past. So we have to make note of that you're about to say something.
Okay, no, I understand what you're saying, but this business about anti-Semitism, we have to be very real about that, because anytime you talk the truth about what's happening, for example, in Gaza, the West Bank, and what this debauchable Israeli government, not all the people in Israel are in favor of that, but what they're doing to these people, then you can't talk about it, because somebody is going to call it anti-Semitism, which is, a gimmick, and we can't continue to fall for that. In the first place, Europeans are not Semites. If you go back to what the term means, go back to the scriptures, the descendants of Shem, they're not descendants of Shem. You and I are descendants of Shem. So that's just a gimmick in order to eliminate people looking seriously about what's happening. What I spoke about is really what the fact is. If somebody gets upset about it, then tell me, attack me on the facts.
Dr. Lucas, Father Lucas, the point that you made regarding individuals not being able to read, one category, another category, some of the brightest minds, some of the sharpest, smartest individuals you've met behind bars. How has that manifested? Give us a couple of instances how it's manifested, that you learn that here's a individual, whatever the age they are, who don't know how to read, and tying that directly to the miseducation in the so-called school system.
Well, if you I conducted classes while I was in the system. I spent 22 years in the system. I just officially retired on December the 13th of 2012. And I conducted classes in many of the facilities. You know, some folks think Rikers Island is just one big jail. No, it's an island on which you have 9 individual jails, one for females and the others for males. And in fact, as a side, the growing incarceration of black and Latino females we should worry about, because what does that say about the family life when 1 out of 3 black males are incarcerated, and now you're incarcerating more females. In many cases, for little or nothing that you wouldn't incarcerate anybody else for. You know, if you and I had defrauded a bank for as little as $20, we'd be up the river. Yet still, when you look at what caused this economic so-called downgrade, not one of the CEOs of Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, J.P. Morgan Chase has been incarcerated, and when they're caught doing, they get a spank on the wrist and pay a small fine that doesn't equal 1% of what they gained for the fraud, but none of them go to jail.
Hold your point while we identify ourselves. This is Respect for Life, coming to you over Harlem Community Radio, WHCR 90.3 on the FM dial, on the internet, www.whcr.org. Our guest online is Father Lucas. He's the author of Black Priest, White Church, and here it is.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
Talk about that classroom situation where you're giving classes. What manifests in those classes?
So, for example, I combine scripture classes with African American history and world history. Some of the most intelligent questions that I've ever received came from many of those who are incarcerated. I remember when I was substituting and teaching scripture at Fordham, for example, the kids in college never came up with some of the questions, some of the ideas that I got from some of the incarcerated and some of them who couldn't even read. And so we started a small group of volunteers trying to do reading classes and so forth and so on in the jails. If you remember, again during the gubernatorial of Pataki, and then followed by Mario Cuomo, and now, good Lord, that a lot of the educational programs were cut out, eliminated.
The understanding that I get from people like Eddie Ellis and another brother I interview here, Brother Robert Muhammad, is that these are both individuals who have spent quite some time incarcerated, that their point is that as the inmates began to get into the education mix before these cutbacks, they were becoming more literate, quote, smarter and more degreed than the people who were in charge of the prisons.
That's correct. And I know both those brothers, and that's absolutely correct. And that's one of the things that, as they were getting more and more seriously educated, they were going to be beaten down, and you were going to find phony charges made against them. And this business of what they call in the state the SHU, and in the city department, the Bings, where people are locked down for 23 hours a day, et cetera, that's all part of the program of making sure that these folks have less and less an impact on the rest of those who are incarcerated. Because many of these brothers, as they began to self-educate and with the help of others, they began to educate their fellows who were incarcerated. I remember they couldn't stop me, but they were limiting what kind of books you could bring into, instead of encouraging you to bring books in. They were had to inspect what books you were bringing in, and what kind of, you could not bring in electronic so that equipment so that people could look at educational films and so forth, and now that was a no-no.
What did you see that would indicate that within the system called the Corrections Department, that there were techniques and programs to actually destroy or take away the mental balance of individuals, be it what form, if that's true, what form did it take or does it take based on your experience?
Well, the lockdowns is one of the primary things. They, as I said, where you're put in isolation and for a long period of time, which is not only cruel and inhuman, but it's done to destroy the thinking process and of human beings. That's one thing that should. Again, the closing down so often of opportunities, and the lack of serious libraries. The only libraries primarily that you find in the system are so-called law libraries, where folks may have some access to books and to people who are in the law libraries, but they're only too interested in their own individual cases and the laws that apply to them, and many of these laws itself should be questioned. But any other books and so forth, you don't find in these libraries at all. One of the things that I was in several of the jails that I had an opportunity to have something to do with was to provide libraries in addition to the law libraries, to provide books that these folks could learn to better their understanding of their condition, better the understanding of the institutions around them, so that they don't get totally fooled from the mentality of the Bill Cosbys and the Oprahs and so forth, namely Negroes, and I use that word deliberately, who have making it in the system, who then turn around and tell folks that what you have to do is to not have your pants hanging down or halfway down your butt, although white folks it's all right, cut your hair and learn the Queen's English, and you're going to get by, get your high school diploma and go to college. And at the same time, the tuition in colleges are being raised so high that if you're going to make it 4 years through college, you're going to have to come out in most instances with a $200,000 debt on your back, if not more. If you recall, in years gone by, college education, city college and so forth were free. People like the late departed Mayor Koch, Beam, and all of those folks got free college education. Right now, the tuition is going up as people are, the Negroes who have made it, come from a different mentality these days. They think they came over on the Mayflower, and which enables them to close their eyes to the institutions of racism that permeates this whole U.S. society. That it's not simply a question of individual acts of racism that you run into, but the whole system and its institutions are racist from the core, and deliberately so.
Telephone number 212-650-6903, 212-650-6903, if you care to join in the conversation with Father Lucas. He's a person who's been in the prison system, the jail system in New York City for some time, and we're talking about how to keep our children out, how many of us find our children and loved ones in there, and now what can we do? What can we do, or I'll put it another way, what is the value in terms of aiding our loved ones who are incarcerated, aiding them in maintaining their mental balance? What is the value of visits and letters based on your experience?
The visits are extremely valuable, and of course, you know that they're even making those things most difficult. Look at where the state's so-called correctional facilities are located. How is somebody from the Bronx or Harlem or Brooklyn going to get up to those places? Some of those places you could walk over to Canada. And then there was that's been almost destroyed, a free bus service that was that folks were able to have in the past. That's being diminished until almost gone. And right now, while I'm in favor of closing down, it's because the whole prison industrial complex is a farce. It doesn't correct. It doesn't do anything except provide jobs primarily for other folks and big incomes to those who are controlling the system. What you now find is it's getting more and more difficult for people. Transportation costs are going up. I don't have to tell you about just Sunday, the increase in transportation costs. The folks who are making $7.25 an hour.
Brother, Dr. Father Lucas, just hold on a second. Caller, you're on the air. God bless you. Thank you for your patience.
Yes, hello, Father Lucas. It's a pleasure speaking to you again. This brother's a saint. I just wish you were over there in Rome and they would vote you in as being the Pope. Because, I mean, with the wisdom and knowledge this brother has, I don't see why, in God's name, that you're not over there being canonized, right? I mean, being in the selective group. That being said, you know, we do have solutions to this problem. The bottom line is, I just spoke to a group of young men who were searched. One, just because he jaywalked. He was running because he was late for a school bus or something, and the police stopped him and held him there for jaywalking, and then he didn't have ID on him. The children have to carry their ID. Just walk a tightrope if they can. And you talk about going upstate. Governor Cuomo did member that free bus system. He did it 2 years ago. And Bill Perkins is trying to get it reinstated, but he purposely did that. It costs well over $100 just to go up to visit our loved ones and friends, and that's the money we be putting in their commissary, and they know that. You go up to these systems, and they don't call them penitentiaries; they call them correctional facilities. Okay? Now, let's remember that because Wall Street is involved. You had BAI that was down there. Now BAI is uptown, thank God, because they were in the den of thieves. It's called correctional facilities. You go up there, they're flying Confederate flags, and they're playing kicker music in the restaurants up there. Okay? We know On the Count starts at 11 o'clock. If you're not there before 11 o'clock, you have to wait 2 hours before you can go in to see somebody. Okay? Because I go and visit people up there. The bottom line is that we need brothers like Father Lucas. A lot of us are getting up in age now, but hey, we still got a lot of piss and vinegar in us, with no disrespect. We just have to, each one teach one. It's in the book.
Okay.
Black Priest, White Church should be in everyone's library. Okay? It should be a billion seller.
Well, I want to thank you for your contribution.
That is because, excuse me, sir, during slavery, the bottom line was, if you learned how to read and write, they would tar and feather you or lynch you. So we know that our history is in the book. Black Priest, White Church, black robes, white justice, okay? Se tu selim shows. It's all the same. And if we cannot discipline our children to get away from those video games and all that poison that's being seen on television, then we're going to have the same problem from generation to generation to generation.
All right, my brother.
And my signature as usual, I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Thank you for your black contribution. This is WHCR 90.3 on the FM dial, and our guest online is Father Lucas, and those of you up in Upper Manhattan at Resurrection Church, 151st Street between McCombs and Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. Some folks up there just went crazy when you started changing around things, Father Lucas, and we talk about mental health on this show. You were causing people to go off the deep edge, my brother. But anyway, telephone number 212-650-6903, 650-6903. Do you know he painted Jesus and Mary and Joseph black? What? Yeah, child, it's in the church.
Well,
hold on a second.
We made things historically and geographically correct. There were no Europeans at that time.
Hold on a second. We'll
Europe
get that.
was a Europeans were Johnny come lately. And these folks, including some so-called black churches who have these big white Jesus pictures up, they must be out of their mind. All of this began on the continent of Africa.
Hold on a second.
Did Jesus become white?
Hold on a second, Father Lucas. Father Lucas. Caller, you're on the air. Thank you for your patience.
Yes, Salaam alaikum, brother.
Walaikum salam.
This is Brother Yusef Sola. How you doing, brother?
Excellent. Go ahead with your question, brother.
Two questions. One, first of all, not a question. First of all, to clarify something, Israel Israel is not a religion. It's not Judaism. So it's not being anti-Semitic when you speak about Israel or this country, so-called country or state of Israel.
You're right. And they're not Semites.
That's number one. And Jews will make that clear for you, real quick, so you can look at Jews against Israel and find information on that. The question I have for Father Lucas is a question that if he could explain a little bit in detail where the Constitution fits into this mass incarceration under the slavery cause, or the so-called freedom has been declared for ex-slaves throughout the country, except for the fact of incarceration, and how that's really playing into. So when you see these stop and frisk and all like that, really basically what it does, it goes back to that slave catcher's mentality. And I'd like for Father Lucas to elaborate on that, if he will, about the Fourth Amendment and the fact of slavery being instituted, being free, but still instituted as incarceration as it exists.
Is that the Fourth Amendment or the 13th Amendment?
I'm not sure. I don't want to make the amendment. That's what I like for Father Lucas, but it is in the Constitution.
And 13 play a part in this, because actually, when you talk about the freeing of those who were enslaved, and I use that term enslaved because they were not slaves. The only slaves are those who, in order to get the goodies that the racist institutions could provide, then they turn against their own folks. But folks have to remember that there's so many rebellions and attempts to escape and so forth of those who were enslaved. But this was exactly that's what the brother was alluding to, that you made it very clear that in the so-called Constitution, by the way, which has been thrown out now in the last, particularly in the last 5 or 6 administrations, including the present one, the Constitution doesn't apply anymore. It is simply being ignored, and we call it in nice terms. But the only folks, according to the 13th and 4th, that can be enslaved are those who are incarcerated. So what happens? If you go back some 70 years or more, then the majority of those who were incarcerated were white folks. And what you have now, of course, the vast majority of those who are incarcerated are people of color. And the brother before, it sounded like Brother Omar, who who talked about the difficulty, for example, of visiting your relatives and friends has been increased. And Andrew Cuomo, who is busy campaigning for the White House, said he was going to close some institutions, and it's interesting which ones he is choosing now. He's choosing those right here in the city, which were basically halfway houses preparing folks to come back into society. Now, if you close those and move them to upstate, instead of helping, why not close those that are upstate? But if you close these here in the city, it's going to be even more difficult then for their entrance back into society, because now they're going to be even more separated from their parents, their friends, and from their attorneys, because very few attorneys are going to go make trips upstate. And in fact, the way so many of them are harassed right here in the city Department of Correction. Very few, very few attorneys are going to be willing to go out to Rikers Island and the red tape of seeing their clients out at Rikers Island. So you could imagine then how many are going to travel miles and miles upstate to see clients.
Telephone number 212-650-6903. God bless you. Thank you for your call. You're on the Black Air.
Yes, God bless you. Father Lucas, I would just like to ask you one question. In all of your years of being in the movement, in the struggle, where do you see us right now as African people? Personally, I think we are at our lowest ebb as far as the struggle goes because of the president that we have in office. And I'll leave you with this. Maybe you can give me your answer on this also. I think the final thing that President Obama is going to give black folks is his apology for us being enslaved by these Europeans. I think that's going to be his final gift to us. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.
I don't even think he's going to apologize. Unfortunately, as I stated earlier, so many of us, although there's a large number who are opening their eyes, are so proud that there is a black face in the White House that is not in dungarees and carrying a pail and a mop. But we forget that it's not a question of whether you're black, white, or green. It's a question in terms of the political agenda. It's a question of what are your policies and what are you doing. I think it was a stroke of genius on the part of the controller, because remember, the billionaires, the millionaires, the corporations, the military-industrial complex is what's running this society. And what was brought to a head with the Supreme Court of Idiots decision and the so-called Citizens United, in which they made it very clear that money talks. And it is money that is those that have the money that is running this society. Forget about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and so forth. And President Obama is simply a tool of the money class. And he is able to get by with doing more harm than even idiot Bush or Slick Willie Clinton, who is a diabolical beast, and his wife, and Ronald Reagan and the rest were able to do.
Hold your point, Father Lucas. We're taking this last call. God bless you. Thank you for your call. You're on the Black Air.
Yes, and it's truly a black day, but good morning, peace and love.
God bless you,
and
brother.
Respect to those, the usual suspects. You know who you are.
Yes,
you're
sir.
out there and you're contributing, and I appreciate it. But good morning, Brother Leroy.
God bless you,
Lucas.
brother. Yes, sir.
I drive the point directly to what it really amounts to. Father Lucas, I'm not asking for a consensus, but I believe that it begins long before the prison system. It begins with housing, it begins with jobs, it begins with a lot of things, but the education or the level that I feel that the education has failed is not necessarily in the schools. They get more education on the street than they do, and when they get to jail, it's supersized. So my point being, or the question would be, I often try to negotiate with Brother Leroy about cause and effect or common sense. Of those numbers that are educating themselves in a prison system, I don't want you to give me a religious breakdown, but you could throw that in if you want. Which portion do you find have the street value of common sense or the home-educated value of common sense? And that's my question.
Okay. Thank you, my brother.
Peace and love.
You got that, Doc?
Yes, I think, unfortunately, in many instances, the street value of education is not going to help us. The home value of education, well, I wish that would improve to a real education and not the television and not the electronic games, and not thinking that we're making it on the basis of what we could buy, the clothing we have, the cars we drive, and so forth and so on. But education should be, as I think some brother earlier brought out, is to bring out the best of humanity, a Whcr, and a Latin, bringing out the best of the what the Creator has given to us from the get-go. And what we find, what is called, look at what's happening, that here you have a mayor who's supposed to be the educational mayor.
We got 2 minutes.
And all he's doing is pushing the so-called charter school, when you could find that the best things that he could bring as chancellors is a Klein or a Sally Black.